Okay, welcome back. Last week we did the introduction. This week we're going to hit hand warmers for nobody. That's the title of this chapter. Again, this is so those that can't get the book, hear the book, or would just like to hear me tell the story, have the opportunity to do that. So here we go, hand warmers for nobody. In the pre-dawn hours of an unusual cold December morning, I ran to the corner store to get milk so that our son would have it in time for breakfast. I grabbed the milk out of the cooler and headed toward the checkout counter. It turns out I wasn't the only one who felt the need to be an early shopper. I was third in line. The guy in front of me had his hands wrapped around his steaming cup of coffee. You could imagine. Oh, it was cold. It was cold. But this guy wanted to do more than warm his hands. His head was bent down over the cup that steam could warm his face. I couldn't see the expression on his face, but I didn't have to. I knew it. But it wasn't until he reached the cashier I realized just how good that steam must have felt. You see, when he noticed a box of hand warmers displayed on the counter, he picked one of the small packages up, read the instructions, gave a little nod, smiled, and tossed them down on the counter next to his coffee. As the cashier rang up the purchase, the man reached into his pocket, pulled out a well-worn wallet. When the young lady told the guy what he owed, his entire body sagged. It was like the lottery ticket had all the right numbers, but the wrong date. He dropped the warmers back in the display, paid for his coffee, and left the store without the hand warmers. And his smile was left at that counter too. Poor guy, I thought to myself, the hand warmers were only a couple of bucks a pack, yet he had to choose between them and the coffee. It was sad to think there was such a chasm between a man I stood only inches away from only a minute earlier and me. I mean, he had to choose, but yet I could buy the milk in my hand and the hand warmers without thinking twice about it. And that is when the Holy Spirit took center stage. My thoughts of pity quickly turned to thoughts of guilt. Why hadn't I offered to cover the cost of the hand warmers? Or better yet, why not buy my milk and the entire box of hand warmers? It wouldn't put any hardship on my family or me. So that's precisely what I did. Now, I know you're probably thinking that by mentioning the Holy Spirit, my motives were purely spirit-driven. Sadly, I cannot say that. Though they weren't wholly reprehensible, my purpose for going big before going home would be better defined as shame. See, shame over not having paid for one package of hand warmers caused me to want to do something bigger. Maybe buying the man an entire box would make up for my failure to jump on the random act of kindness bandwagon. Besides, God would surely be more impressed with this gesture than with a quick, hey, put that on my ticket, wouldn't he? Rushing out the door with the box of hand warmers, I was ready to do my good deed and get all warm and fuzzy from the gratitude and appreciation he would surely send my way. But that's when the Holy Spirit stepped in to teach me a lesson about being aware and on the lookout for opportunities to be salt and light we are called to be ready at the drop of a hat to serve others by meeting their needs, however we can, to recognize that God can and will use us in every situation we find ourselves to help us get to know him and work on his behalf. How did he teach that lesson? When I walked out, the man was nowhere to be found. My pride and vanity were crushed. No shy smiles of gratitude for me. No, thanks, mister. I really appreciate you helping out a guy like me. Which then brings me to another realization. The realization that the Holy Spirit was also teaching me a lesson about false pride, pure motives. See, the thing about the Holy Spirit being part of you, having this residence in you, he can teach us despite ourselves. He can cause us to say, who am I to think this had anything to do with me? Knowing that I needed to pay better attention in the future, I got back in my truck and started thinking of how I might turn this around to be truly selfless, to a truly selfless act of kindness. My coworkers, I thought we would be working out in the cold, so they would surely appreciate the hand warmers. Wrong. They didn't want them. Again, this was no coincidence. That box of unopened, seemingly unwanted hand warmers rode shotgun in my truck, reminding me of my failure to serve when I should have. I didn't want to be that guy then, and I don't want to be that guy now or in the future. So I prayed for an opportunity to make things right. A couple days later, my prayer was answered on my way to a customer's house. As I was driving down the street, I saw him. Yeah, the man I originally bought the hand warmers for. He was cleaning up around the pumps at a store across the street from where I initially met him. Turns out he worked for several small stores in the area, helping maintain their properties. I stopped, got out of the truck, carrying the box of hand warmers, and offered them to him. He said that he had already gotten some and told me to give them to somebody who could use them. Man, talk about a letdown. Apparently, the only use for these things was to keep reminding me of what I hadn't done. In my former life, I would have become dissatisfied or even angry. Thank God, though, that was then, this is now. Now, I was thinking along the lines of being glad the guy got what he needed, but still sorry and felt somewhat foolish that I hadn't been thinking perfectly enough like God to play a part in him receiving that blessing. It may not seem like a big deal, and in the scheme of all things, it was not. However, I still carried remorse, failing to help when help was needed. I was sorry for what I hadn't done. I regretted not hearing and listening to the Spirit's prompting that morning in the convenience store. I was trying to make amends, but I wasn't having much success in that department. Nobody wanted to let me help them. I even considered just throwing the box of hand warmers in the trash. Maybe I was supposed to learn something from them that way, but I didn't, which meant when I climbed into my truck the next morning, they were still riding shotgun with me. As I made my way across town to go to work, I saw Thomas, a young man at a bus stop that had previously given a ride to his classes at a local community college. Maybe he would have a use for the hand warmers. I pulled over to the curb and stopped. When he saw it was me, he walked over to the truck. After exchanging greetings, I offered him some of the hand warmers. He took a couple of pairs without any hesitation and thanked me with a big smile on his face. As I drove away, I thought, what do you believe I was thinking? Something like, finally, it's about time? Or thanks God for finally letting me do this? No, none of the above. As I drove away, I glanced back in my rearview mirror to see him unwrapping the package. And the first thought that came into my head was the comment from the man in the convenience store. Give them to someone who can use them. Over the next few weeks, I had the opportunity after opportunity to give away packages of hand warmers to someone, anyone who needed them. Or in the words of my friend, someone who could use them. In retrospect, it is easy to see that once I quit trying to figure out who I thought needed the hand warmers and just be aware of who was in front of me, the opportunities began to present themselves. And one of these opportunities would transform my understanding of God. I gave them to a cart boy at the grocery store, the guy at the home supply store who loaded my purchase to the back of my truck, some people like Thomas who were waiting for the bus to take them to school or work, and anyone else who looked like they could use a little extra warmth, including a couple of homeless people. Reflections. Falling short of our ideals can serve as motivation to stay in the Spirit. What about you? Have you ever missed an opportunity? Silly question, right? Because we all have multiple times. The difference maker, though, is when you realize you missed it, messed up, whatever, and then set out to rectify the situation. When the Spirit's leading and right motives, with the Spirit's leading and right motives, that is. We also need to remember not to dwell on those missed opportunities, but rather to use them to remind us to be better listeners, better observers, and better doers. When that happens, we experience the joys of being aligned with the will of God. We experience a movement toward the perfection of which we are striving. We see the world and others through the eyes of God. In other words, it is both learning from our mistakes and taking definitive action not to repeat them, versus learning from them but doing nothing at all. Have you ever had an experience like that? Have you ever tried to make something right or do something for someone only to find your services weren't needed? How did you respond? When we fall short of our ideals, we often experience guilt. It amazes me how much we allow guilt to affect our relationships and our actions. Ever heard the saying, making a mountain out of a molehill? Guilt is often the contractor that built that mountain. In writing this, I thought about Jacob and Esau's reunion. After 20 years, give or take a couple, 20 years after Jacob manipulated, deceived, connived, cheated, and stole from his brother, Jacob was shaken in his sandals to meet his brother, his twin brother. So much so that he addressed him as master and sent extravagant gifts ahead of them as a sort of peace offering. He went so far as to separate his family into two groups in the event that Esau was planning an ambush. Not all of them would die. That's guilt. We often allow guilt, pride, fear, selfishness, and resentment to keep us from being our true selves. In other words, who we are called to be. People, loving people. What about you? FYI, you're going to get asked that question a lot throughout this book. Are you limiting your talents and the ability to be used for good of yourself and others? Are your preconceived notions, pride, fear, prejudices, and unwillingness to change keeping you from becoming more mature in your relationship with God, from becoming more aware of and striving toward being more like God? Before you move on to the next chapter, I encourage you to read the text from Matthew 25 on the next page. As you read, put yourself in the story. Which servant are you, and how willing, and how will you multiply the talents, bags of gold, which God has entrusted to you? How will you use them to become more mature in your relationship with the Holy Spirit? And this is from Matthew 25. It will be as when a man who was going on a journey called in his servants and entrusted his possessions to them. To one he gave 5 talents, to another 2, to a third 1, to each according to his ability. Then he went away. Immediately the one who received 5 talents went and traded with them and made another 5. Likewise, the one who received 2 made another 2. But the man who received 1 went off, dug a hole in the ground, and buried his master's money. After a long time, the master of those servants came back and settled accounts with them. The one who had received 5 talents came forward, bringing the additional 5. He said, Master, you gave me 5 talents. See, I have made 5 more. His master said to him, well done, my good and faithful servant. Since you were faithful in small matters, I will give you great responsibility. Come share your master's joy. The one who received 2 talents also came forward and said, Master, you gave me 2 talents. See, I have made 2 more. His master said to him, well done, my good and faithful servant. Since you were faithful in small matters, I will give you great responsibilities. Come share your master's joy. Then the one who had received 1 talent came forward and said, Master, I knew you were a demanding person, harvesting where you did not plant and gathering where you did not scatter. So out of fear, I went off and buried your talent in the ground. Here it is back. His master said to him in reply, you wicked, lazy servant. So you knew I harvest where I did not plant and gather where I did not scatter. Should you not then have put my money in the bank so that I could have got it back with interest on my return? Now then, take this talent from him and give it to the one with 10. For to everyone who has, more will be given, and he will grow rich. But from the ones who has not, even what he has will be taken away. And throw this useless servant into the darkness, where there will be wailing and grinding of teeth. You know, reading that gospel reading, especially the way it ends, it may sound harsh. But the purpose of it being with that story is that that part of my story is that we've all been given talents. Talents then was a bag of gold, but we've all been given gifts from God in some way or another. And those gifts are to be used to help out our brothers and sisters, to help out our neighbors, to help out our enemies, all of it. And so when the opportunity presents itself for us to help, then we should step forward. And it can be small. Matter of fact, this whole story is going to hopefully just put a lens on how God can take a small act of love and create so much out of it. So much out of it. You know, I didn't know what to do with those hand warmers, but I knew to not just throw them away. And like I said in the chapter, once I just started paying attention to who was in front of me, the opportunities presented themselves. So I hope you got something from this. We're going to continue going, reading the next chapters. That'll be the next video. Moving on from here. And pretty soon we're going to meet homeless Jesus. Thanks. God bless.